Hello, and welcome to this special Minnesota virtual event that is part of Rain Taxi's 2021 Twin Cities Book Festival. I'm Eric Lorber, the director of Rain Taxi. We are a nonprofit organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature. If you don't yet know much about us, I invite you to check out our website anytime and to learn more about our quarterly magazine of critical writing and the other great programs we produce to help take readers to where writing is going, including the other upcoming events in this festival. This event, like most of ours, is free to attend, but if anyone out there is able to pitch in a little something, feel free to use the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Some funding for our festival comes from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council and the Minnesota State Arts Board, and as you can see for this session, ASL interpreting access is available thanks to our friends at the University of Minnesota Libraries. But despite all these great sponsors, our most vital support has always come from individual readers. Whether you're a one-time giver or you'd like to become a member of Rain Taxi and stay in touch with us year-round, we are grateful for your support. Don't forget to participate in all the other ways on your screen today. There's that chat column where reader observations and comments are always welcome. If you have a question for the authors, then use the Ask a Question box. And we're going to try to get to those at the end of the session. And of course, you can buy the books. And if you purchase a copy of any of these titles, they'll be coming to you from Red Balloon Bookshop, a great independent store here in the Twin Cities. It's now my great pleasure to welcome these authors to the screen. We have an exciting session focused on the Minnesota picture book today with Molly Beth Griffin, author of 10 Beautiful Things, Mélina Mangal, author of Jayden's Impossible Garden, and Kao Kalia Yang, whose new book is From the Tops of the Trees. Moderating today's discussion is one of the most noted Minnesota picture book authors of all time, the wonderful John Coy. So I turn it over to John now and welcome everyone to this session on the Minnesota picture book.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you everybody for joining us. We're so happy to have you here for the Twin Cities Book Festival. I want to start by acknowledging that this is the first Twin Cities Book Festival without longtime book festival supporter and Rain Taxi board member, Paul Von Drasek. Paul was such a champion of the book festival, and it feels fitting to acknowledge Paul here and know that he would just love this panel with these three terrific authors. So Mélina, Molly, and Kalia are going to each share a brief section from their book, and then we will have a conversation. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll start with Mélina.
Hello there. I am very happy to be here. Thank you to Rain Taxi and Eric and for inviting me here and to be part of this panel with the rest of you and for all of everyone who's tuning in. I'm going to read a few pages from Jayden's Impossible Garden, written by me, Mélina Mangal, and it's illustrated by Ken Daly. Jayden loved nature. At school, he played outside during recess. On field trips, he pretended to be a scientist, collecting acorns, stones, and twigs. In Jayden's favorite books, kids played in tree houses or climbed rocks. But after school, Jayden had to stay inside. There's no nature here in the middle of the city, Mama said. Jayden knew there was. On his way home, he watched squirrels scrounge for snacks. He listened to the calls of cardinals. He felt fat, furry snowflakes as they fell from the sky and landed on his face. A wheelchair van lowered Mr. Curtis onto the sidewalk in front of Jayden's building each afternoon. He would inch forward and stop, then look around, from the sky to the ground. He'd close his eyes to breathe in the cold, fresh air before wheeling in. Jayden wondered if Mr. Curtis wanted to be outside as much as he did. And that's all I'm going to read for the moment so that the others can read their books. Thank you.
I love that book, Mélina. I'm so excited for it. It makes me happy. My book is called 10 Beautiful Things. That's out this year. Written by me, illustrated by Maribel Lachuga. And I'll just read a few pages for you. And there they are on the title page, packing up. Lily ran her finger across the Iowa map. An X marked Graham's house on an empty patch of land, Lily's new home. Graham's car tires hummed against the pavement. Lily felt the vibration in her hollow chest. Let's try to find 10 beautiful things along the way, Graham said. Lily turned her eyes to the window. There's nothing beautiful here, she said. She struggled to fold the map so it nestled into itself just right. You'd be surprised, Graham said. And sure enough, at that very moment, the sun broke over the long horizon. Lily gasped. There's number 1, she cried. Right you are, Lily, said Graham. And that's how it starts. And then they look for beautiful things all the way to Graham's house. Thank you. Kalia, your turn.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Mélina and John, Alan, Rain Taxi. I'm delighted to be here to share from my newest book, From the Tops of the Trees, illustrated by Rachel Wada, and written, of course, by me. I'm not going to try to hold the book up while I'm reading, so I'll read it up and then hold it up. Dedications. For the loving arms that hold us high so we can see beyond the fences of our worlds. Rachel's dedication. To Kalia, who has gone beyond the tops of the trees to share her story with the world. From the Tops of the Trees by Kao Kalia Yang, illustrated by Rachel Wada. I'll read a few of the opening spreads and then my favorite spread of all. Ban Binai Refugee Camp, Thailand, 1985. When the sun gets to the highest point in the sky, the leaves of our favorite tree become a great umbrella of cool for my cousins and me to play under. Hurry! Mai throws a ball of rice onto the ground, and Zhao races the chickens in the yard to get to it. A bald rooster with black-tail feathers beats her. The look on her face is so sad and so hungry, the fun disappears. After a night of heavy rain and wind, we wake to find pebbly fruit scattered on the ground. Beneath our tree, Zhao and I crouch low and look for the fruits that are still good enough to eat. We know that if we eat too many, we'll get stomach aches and our mothers will be mad. If we eat only 1 or 2, we can pretend we're eating hard candy, and it is a very special treat. That evening, before my evening bath, I looked down into the cement well and asked my father why we lived behind a gate. I want to know why other people can come in, but we can't leave. He says, we live in a refugee camp, a place to hold people who are running away from wars. I ask, Father, is all of the world a refugee camp? No, he says. What is the world outside this camp like? I ask. My father has no answers for me. This is a story that I've held close to my heart for many seasons. It's a story that's helped me walk through some of the hardest moments of my life. And I'm super excited that on Tuesday it enters the world. And I hope that this story will do the same for children everywhere. There is always a world beyond. Thank you all.
Thank you, all three, for just such beautiful introductions to your books. Each of these books just touches my heart. And I'd like to begin by asking, what was the inspiration for your story? And let's start with Mélina again.
Well, interestingly enough, what inspired the book is not actually in the book right now. It started many years ago on a warm spring evening when I was out walking with my husband. And this was actually before my daughter was born. And I can hear really well, and my husband can see really well, but I kept hearing something that was kind of a snap, crackle, pop kind of sound. It was kind of a squishy, crackling sound. And I would stop and ask my husband, do you hear this sound? And he didn't hear it. We'd walk a little bit more. I'd ask, do you hear that? There it is again. To me, it felt pretty loud and pretty clear. He could not hear it. And so it kind of mystified me that I was hearing this thing that was just really clearly resonating in my head, and he couldn't. After a number of walks during this same time of year, I started researching this and realized that it was worms. There was worms coming up through the ground in the lawns, and they do make a sound. And clearly not everyone can hear it, but I could, and it was really, really working on me. And so that experience really made me think about the kids I work with. I work as a school librarian in an elementary school. And I thought about the curiosity that they display, the kinds of things that they observe. And then when my daughter started coming on the walks with us, the same kind of thing was happening. She would notice things, she's closer to the ground, that we wouldn't notice. And so I thought of some of my kids and how some of them do not have lovely yards like other people. Some of them are living in high-rise apartments, but they're still noticing nature. Nature is still around us. And I wanted to try and connect that feeling, that curiosity with what if, you are in a situation where you are in a very urban environment that may not have the type of green space. And that's what really got the wheels turning. And I wanted to showcase a student or a child who loves nature and sees it there. Maybe when other people get too busy, we're going back and forth to work. Parents are busy with their day to day, and it's not as obvious. And so I wanted to bring those together. And that was the spark that started that book. And the early drafts did include the young character, the main character, listening to worms, but that got cut out, and that was me. It went through different versions because it ended up with 2 different stories, and so that's still in another story that may or may not appear one day. But it started with the worms, so so kind of funny, but that was the spark.
Okay, I love the idea. It started with the worms.
Yes.
How about you, Molly?
That's so funny that you went first, and now I get to say the same thing happened with this book, which has been in the works for about 12 years. Mm-hmm. And I wrote it after or during, I don't remember, a road trip to see the sandhill crane migration in Nebraska. So the early drafts had the sandhill crane migration and a child on a road trip to go and see that. And it isn't in there at all anymore. Now it's a move, not a trip, and it's a very different story. But the idea of moving through a space that maybe doesn't look pretty to you initially, and then kind of discovering what's cool about it over time by looking harder has been there the whole time. And that trip to Nebraska, I have driven that road 1,000 times because we have relatives in Colorado. I went to school for undergrad in Iowa. So that road is very familiar to me, that drive through that part of the country that I think a lot of people don't see as pretty at all. But it becomes special to you, and we figure out how to make a place home by looking harder, I think. So that's, the Sandhill Cranes are not in there. That's a different book. I split it in half, and I have a manuscript about Sandhill Cranes that hasn't sold, but this road trip story became 10 Beautiful Things and changed drastically, but I think that idea is still in there.
Great. Kalia?
I love what you both said about discoveries and the changes that happen in time. So From the Tops of the Trees is a real story from my life. For those of you who know my work, you know that I was born in a refugee camp, and it was all I knew for the first 6 years of my life. In this place where I was born, I used to ask about a world beyond. And my father, perhaps exhausted by my questions, perhaps because he's a poet, in his poet's heart there was a possibility. He took me in my best clothing to the very tops of the tallest tree in the camp so I could see a world beyond. I can actually show you the actual photo taken on that day, the day of the story. It's in the back of the book in the author's note. But it wasn't until I had children that the ideas came together. My kids kept on asking, "Mommy, where were you when you were our age?" And so I said, "I was in a refugee camp." And they're like, "What is that?" And in telling them these stories, I was awash again, not only by the magic of that moment, but by the reality that we live in a world that is creating more and more refugees all the time. There are children right now in this moment living somewhere closer to the life I had than the life my children have here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I wanted this reality I wanted to make room for this reality in the life of my children, the life of all children, in some ways, the life of young Kalia. And so, along with my incredible editor, Carol Hinz, this book emerged, and it's now making its way into the world. And I hope that it not only speaks to the intimate story between my father and me, but of all of the relationships across all of refugee children's lives, the people who have lifted them up when they've fallen, who've held them high to see a bigger world.
Well, that's just beautiful. Thank you. Thank you each for that. And I know we have some picture book writers watching, some people who want to write picture books. And I think it's really helpful to see how these picture books start out and the process they go through. Kalia, you mentioned your editor, Carol Hinz. I'd like each of you to tell us a little bit about how your story changed working with the editor. And Molly, let's start with you this time.
Okay. I haven't been on a call with you, Kalia. When you speak, it makes me cry. And so here we are. My editor for this book is Yolanda Scott at Charlesbridge, and she's a genius. And I was very lucky to work with her. Like I said, this book was super long in the making, and that was partly because I and then my agent were submitting it a ton, and it kept coming back with the same rejections, which were that it was too long, that it was too sophisticated, and that it wouldn't work for the young picture book audience. So I heard multiple times that I should make it into a middle grade, and I think it could work as a middle grade, but I didn't want to write it as a middle grade. I wanted it to have art and to be a read aloud. So I pushed with that, and then this editor finally said to me, well, via email through my agent, how about we put it in third person, because it was in first person all that time. And that one small suggestion changed it drastically. It made it so much easier to see the child as younger. And she got younger through the process of revising it with the editor. And I teach picture book writing, and I should have thought of that, but I didn't. So it took that suggestion to turn it from something that nobody thought was a picture book into very clearly a picture book. So it changed that way. The point of view changed. The text got a lot shorter. That always happens in my experience, is we write more than we need to write. And then gradually over the course of editorial process and then art, the text gets culled with every step because more of the story is being told visually. So the text gets redundant and you feel like it's okay to let it go. Like you hold on to that text so tight for so long. And then once there's art, it's like, you can just let it go. So that was definitely, you can see in the drafts, like each time it gets shorter and shorter, the art takes over and the text gets tighter. And that was really, it's always fun. I love that part. That's one of my favorite things, is seeing how the visuals run with it and make it better and more of a whole experience of this lap sit or this story time, right?
How about you, Kalia? How about working with Carol?
So this is Carol and my third book together. Carol's actually the editor responsible for my first book, A Map into the World, which took a lot of work. It took a lot of going back and forth and revising the story, adding in things and taking things out. Our second book, The Most Beautiful Thing, was a much faster process. You know, I then understood what happened when you turn a page, the 32-page spread versus like the thicker books, because I first emerged as a writer in the adult world, and that is still a home that I love. And so I feel like children's book is a little bit like a vacation home, people. And here in Minnesota, we talk about cabins, and I've never had a cabin. I don't know that I want one, but children's book world is like that cabin where I go to, in some ways, to escape from some of the other pressures of the adult world. And so by the time we got to From the Tops of the Trees, I think Carol and I knew much more what to expect. I had a keener sense of her style as an editor, her precision in terms of language. And so with this one, we didn't have to go back very much at all. You know, we went through the book and then we talked some about the images that came from my life that would be good to share with Rachel Wada. And then the thing happened, and it's now become a more magical thing than I can imagine, thanks to Rachel's art, but the incredible team. Yes, I worked with Carol, but there's of course Danielle, the whole design team. A book is very much a project born out of a community in many ways, not just the community within the story, but the community that makes it possible for that story to enter into the world. And so I have a lot of people to thank for this book. You know, and I go back to that dedication. I had no idea that Rachel would dedicate the book to me. And I'm so happy that it was Carol who shared that with me, because I wept. You know, I wept silently to myself, but also out of gratitude to the many wonderful people who believe in the stories that come forth. I wish I can tell you all that we believe in our stories from the onset, but that's not necessarily how it happens. More and more people buy into it, and then all of a sudden, it is bigger and more beautiful than we ever dared to imagine.
Mélina.
I'm still digesting what you said, Kalia. I agree and want to echo what both of you said about that collaborative process and how it really makes for a better product or a better book. I worked with my editor, Allison Benke, at Free Spirit, and the whole process was different for me, but also for everyone involved, because this was a collaborative effort with different publishers as well. So Jayden's Impossible Garden was the winner of the first African American Voices contest, which was sponsored with Strive Publishing, which is a newer publishing company in the Twin Cities as well. And so there was already a collaboration with Strive and Free Spirit in a way to talk about what type of book this could become. And then I had a lot of discussions early on with the acquiring editor, Meg Bratch, as well, which was amazing, because basically she was asking me what I envisioned for the book. And that really set the pace and the course for the rest of the editorial work, I think. This was also my first fiction picture book, because I'd worked on a biography before, a picture book biography. So that was different for me as well. And I was a little nervous about what to expect, but like Molly Beth, what happened was, typically I'm a little bit wordier than I need to be. So Allison really helped rein in the words and helped tighten the manuscript. One thing that was changed a lot was, of course, the titles, because my original manuscript title had a different name, and the character's name was Aaron. And then for the contest that I entered it in, I changed it to Isaiah, because I like that name too. And it turns out that Strive had a number of books with a character, or at least a couple of newer books with the same character's name, Isaiah. So I changed it at that time. But the Impossible Garden, that whole notion and that title came from Allison and the team at Free Spirit. And I think it was just an amazing title. And it's one that I hadn't thought of, and just thought, this is what's wonderful about working with other people who care about what you're trying to do, to make it, just this book that will appeal, but also really hit at the themes and the ideas that you're trying to convey, which is what I was lucky to have. One thing that changed a bit, and there were a number of questions on, was about Jayden and where he lived, and his mother's reaction to things, because I initially had portrayed her a little bit more cautious, and that's how I grew up too. And when you're in the city, and there's things you need to be more aware of and cautious of at times, but I didn't want that to become an overarching theme that it's he needs to be really scared or worried. But those are issues that I still felt the need or wanted to connect, because not everyone is in a really happy, lovely neighborhood situation. I didn't want to delve into that though, but I somehow wanted to try and convey that his mother didn't want him to go out as much. And there were reasons for that, but we don't, I had in the original manuscript more about that. But we decided to focus more on, connecting with the nature and the joy that brings, even if your situation may not be what other people have. So that's something that did change in the manuscript a bit through the editorial process. And his mother was a bit more worried at times when he was, out with the neighborhood, like, what's going on? What's happening? And also the original title was Jayden's Secret. And, with young kids, we don't want to keep secrets, really big secrets or anything like that. But part of it was just that Jayden was really happy and working on trying to show his mother what he was doing. And so that's why it was really a great thing when Free Spirit was able to come up with that other title, which suggested, of course, the possibility in what some other people considered to be the impossible. So it's really interesting and fun, I think, working with a new person, because Allison was just so amazingly gentle and kind with her queries, and really sought to find out what was in the back of my head, what I was really trying to convey, to help me get at the right words to make it, just as good as it can be. So I thought it was a great process.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for that. You've each mentioned your illustrator, and when we submit a picture book, we're not sure what the illustrations are going to look like. Do each of you have a particular illustration in your book that you were really, really surprised by, or really taken by, or means something really special to you? Kalia, let's start with you.
So while I don't get to choose my illustrator, I kind of do. How Lerner has worked it is they'll present 3 or 4, and then I get to choose my first choice and second choice and so on and so forth. Rachel was my first choice. So it's such a gift for me to be able to work with Rachel. I'd seen her portfolio and read one of her children's books, and I love how complicated The Scape is, how in so many ways there are so many stories hidden. Every page is a story in and of itself. One of my favorite spreads from this one is when the girl makes it to the tops of the trees. I mean, this is so true to the story, but it's also so true to my life. So much of the way I see the world is filtered through the poetry of my father. You know, my father has this thing where he used to tell all of us that before we were born, we lived in his eyes. And although he couldn't know who we would be, he was always looking at the world for all of us. And so this one, I think, captures that beautifully. I feel like now that I'm able to go to so many of the places my father has never been, I carry his eyes with me, and I take pictures in my heart for when I return and he says, "What did you do? What did you see?" And then I also want to show, because I think I've had many authors' photos now, including many that I love. Oh, but this one I cherish. So I want to show you all. That's me and my dad right now. We are the author of the story together. Without him, the story would never be. We don't hear very often about the relationships between fathers and daughters, particularly in the Asian American context, and then definitely in the Hmong American context. And so all of these things were so important to me. The fact that Rachel captured in that one picture the way I really experienced the world, along with my father, and then that photo of us at the end, the facts of my life, the facts that make me more beautiful, not less so, to the world that we belong to.
Thank you. Mélina?
I really like Ken Daly's style. I too, just like Kalia and Molly, I did not know who was going to be. Well, Kalia did have an idea, but I did not know who the illustrator would be until the project started. But when I saw Ken Daly's initial sketches and I saw some of his samples from other works he had done, I was really excited. He is from Canada, but his family is from the Caribbean, from Dominica and the West Indies. And so he grew up with this vibrancy, this, cultural heritage of the Caribbean, informing a big part of his art. And so I was really excited that he was going to be doing the art for Jayden's Impossible Garden. And I love all the pictures, but there's one in particular that surprised me that I liked as much. And it's this picture. Let me get the sheen here of Jayden and Mr. Curtis when they find a caterpillar in the garden. And I really love this picture because it captures some of that vibrancy that I think is part of the story. I think there's a lot of movement in Ken's art that I really enjoy. And I think buoys the story even more. And it captures that joy that I was trying to convey with Jayden, combining forces with Mr. Curtis. What I also like too in this picture is that the joy on Mr. Curtis's face. Yes, Jayden is the main character, but just the fact that he is helping spark this joy in his elderly neighbor and rekindle maybe some of Mr. Curtis's childhood memories and pastimes is something that I really think Ken did an amazing job of capturing. And I was surprised that was the picture that I liked the most, because I do like when the garden comes together at the end as well, and the magical element that he was able to infuse in it with his colors. But I love just the emotion that he's able, and the joy through the characters' faces too. And the fact that he's able to, because there's a lot of neighbors in there at one point, a couple of points there, to really flesh them out as other characters that are distinctly different and unique. I think he does a great job with as well. So I just love the energy that he brings to all of the illustrations. I think there's just a lot of movement that I think helps. So, yeah.
Thank you. Molly?
I love that about your book, Mélina, that intergenerational piece that's in there. I just think that's really special. And that illustration was perfect to show that kind of intimate connection that is made between the child and the elder. And I just love that about it. And that's a perfect picture. I have a similar feeling about Maribel Lachuga, who my editor chose. She lives in Spain. I've never met her. But Yolanda had been working with her on a different book, and she was like, trust me. She showed me her website and she was like, okay, your website's okay, but just trust me. She's going to do a good job with this. And she obviously did. And I mean, a lot of what's obvious to say here is these big spreads that are, you know, the point of the book is that they're beautiful. This is a creek melting is the beautiful thing here, but we get it from above the birds, from the birds' perspective, which I think is super clever. I'm going to cheat and show you more than one, because the next page is the falling apart barn. And this one is one where I pushed back a little because her barn was not super falling apart in the early drafts, and I wanted it to be like skeletal. So I love that she took that and ran with it and made it really destroyed. And the point of this page is that it doesn't have to be pretty to be beautiful. And I think that that image and the tree with the crows too does a just really nice job with that. So there's lots of like these big splashy, pretty pictures, and then these more kind of small, intimate moments. And I think the fact that she does both of those really well is what really needed to happen for this book. So this is Lily smelling the mud, and this is the image that I need in my life, like all the time, is just like chill out and smell the mud. It'll be okay. This also looks kind of a lot like me when I was a kid, which of course she couldn't know, but I had like bangs like that and all of that. So I actually had a little peg doll made of Lily smelling the mud, and I keep it here on my desk to remind me to like chill out and smell the mud sometimes. So, and the worms, I didn't know they made a sound. That's amazing. Now I know that.
Okay.
They do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for that. Molly, you mentioned intergenerational. I think you all have a strong intergenerational aspect in your stories. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about how that changes the story to have the emphasis on the child with someone in another generation. Mélina, will you start?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a big part of our culture, a big part of African-American culture to have other, relatives involved in your life. I benefited from having a number of uncles nearby here in the Twin Cities when we moved to St. Paul. My father is the youngest of 7. So my uncles were quite a bit older, and so cousins as well. So I feel like I benefited tremendously from having that extended family. With my students have seen a lot of grandparents and other family members, as well as other neighbors as caregivers or people who will come in and step in. And I think that's something I wanted to see more in children's books, and I wanted to help convey. The character of Mr. Curtis came to me as well from observing other neighbors that I had when I was living in North Carolina, for example. And he turned out to be a composite of some friends of mine that I wasn't really conscious of it at that time, but I realized he's a composite of 2 of my friends, one who is in a wheelchair and her husband. But I think that's especially in this last year, it has become even more apparent as I taught taught virtually to so many families who was with my students, helping them, getting them onto online and getting them everything that they needed when their parents were working or not there, or when they are taking care of their kids. And so there's so many people that are part of our lives and part of students and kids' lives that I wanted to pay attention to and to honor. And I think many people now too are living in situations, they may be in an apartment or it may be a bigger neighborhood. They may not know their neighbors as well. But I think when we start making those connections, we find how much of a benefit we can get, not only for the kids, but also for the elders. I think making those connections is very important. And I wanted to try and convey that with the story as well, that it just takes reaching out, little by little, and there's some great partnerships that can be found that are, again, mutually beneficial.
Thank you. Molly?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I like to write different kinds of families into my books. In Rhoda's Rock Hunt, my earlier picture book, I have 3. That one has an aunt and uncle who are the grown-ups for the child, and it's that's normal to her. And this one is a child and a grandparent, and we don't know the backstory of why she's going to live with her grandparent, but there are lots and lots of reasons why kids live with different configurations of families. My family, my children have 2 moms, and I do write stories with 2 moms in them as well. But there's also just this idea of found family that I think is more common than you would think given what you see in picture books, but also really common among queer families. Like, we just bring in different kinds of connections. So I think that was important to have it show the grandparent. I'm also watching my mom be a grandma to my own kids, which has been wonderful. She loves being a grandma, and my kids are really close to her. So I liked showing that relationship and that closeness between them. And I actually have gotten a ton of amazing responses to this book from grandparents who are either just very involved with their grandkids or who are custodial parents of their grandkids, guardians of their grandkids. And I think showing just more and more kinds of families in picture books is a wonderful thing, because kids live in all kinds of situations, and that has been true forever, but we have not seen it until more recently. Books, thankfully, are getting more diverse in that way. And I know my kids benefit from not always seeing mom, dad, brother, sister in the books.
Yes, thank you, Molly. We all do. Yes, Kalia.
So I became a writer in large part because of my grandma. I've only ever known the one. My grandfathers died when my parents were just children. And then in the war in Laos, my mother left her mother behind when she was 16 to walk toward this life with us. So growing up, there were not a lot of people who had grandparents. And if they did, then if they were lucky, then they perhaps had a grandma. And so I had the one grandma. My grandma couldn't read or write. She could, of course, read the clouds in the sky, the direction of the wind, the things that grew from the earth, but she'd never been to school. I remember getting my first library card and running home and showing my grandma the purple St. Paul Public Library card and saying, "Grandma, now I can go and check out all of the stories in the world." And my grandma, she smiled, she celebrated with me, and then she said, "Are there stories like mine in it?" I spent most of my childhood, and I've spent now most of my adulthood looking for stories like my grandma's. And at some point, I realized that if I didn't put them there, they would never make it there. Not the way I knew our life to be. And so, grandma's the seminal force in my life. Not only her, but my aunts and my uncles, they have taught me incredible things about the power of story. My Uncle Ju, who was a teacher, the most educated person in our family, before a gun replaced the pen that he held in his hand. He used to tell me stories all the time when I was a kid. We didn't have books or like TV, so my uncle would hold up his arm and he'd say to me, "Every hair on my arm, that is a tree in the jungle. My fist, these things, these knuckles, they're mountains. My veins, these are the rivers. The whole of the world would explode on the stretch of his arm." I've watched that arm age. I've watched the muscles grow soft and fall underneath the bone. When I write John, Molly, and Mélina, I write to remember, and I write to show the people in my life and out there in my world that I love them, that I haven't forgotten them, that my world is full because of them in large part. And so whenever I go to the page, I think about the beauty in my world. I think about the beautiful people that are there that make it whole. And I give myself to the force of who they are, who I am, and the children I'm raising, the children that will come. I'm a mother now. I'm 40 years old. I'm probably halfway through this journey, maybe. And I think all the time, what if there comes a time when I can't write anymore? What if there comes a time when the voice that I speak will die again inside of me? When that time comes, at least I use this time to do what I could, to remember and to love the people who I know have loved me, loved generations of children like me. And so intergenerational writing, I think, is the only way to write for the future. It is the only way to hold tight to those who I know will one day be gone, just as I will be gone one day.
Thank you, Kalia. That's beautiful, all three of you. And I think I cannot recommend these books enough. They're three books for our time. Each of them acknowledges the difficulties in life, and each of us is such a call to pay attention, to look closely, to wonder, and to dream big. And I encourage all of you to press the button, get these books from Red Balloon, and really spend time with them. The more time I spent with them, the more I realized how well these three books go together. And I hope parents, teachers, and librarians see that as well. Thank you all for just terrific books. And Eric, we will go back to you for final words.
Well, thank you, John, and thanks to all of you for this wonderful presentation. I know I'm far from the only adult reader out there who remembers the picture books of my childhood and loves to see great new picture books coming into the world. And it is a marvelous art form and a thrill that authors like yourselves are so deeply committed to it and to honing that craft and making works of beauty. We do have several questions, so maybe we can get to a couple of them in the short time we have left. And any and all of you, feel free to answer. One person asks, based on how all of you spoke about the benefits of the editorial process and helping you slim down the works, but did it ever go the other way? Was there something that you had to advocate, like, no, that has to stay in, I have to draw the line?
As a writer and as a person, I'm pretty good at first, I'm not married to my first drafts of anything. And I think that is critical to this process of growing and developing. To stay as a writer, we have to grow. In order to grow, we have to grow beyond ourselves. That process is painful. You know, when your bone outstretches, when your skin, must accommodate what is growing inside, everything hurts a little bit. So pain is a part of the process. I mean, let that be known. And then I think the truth is also, if something isn't working, part of the craft challenge for me is there another way I can tackle this? Like, that's part of the stimulating thing. I want to be able to come up with ways of handling what my editor wants on the page, but also being true to me and the story that I'm coming from. And with each book that I write, that power grows a little bit stronger. It's just like going to the gym. I don't go to the gym, people, but I understand if you work certain muscles, they get stronger. And that's a muscle that I've been working forever as a Hmong American writer, and definitely to come forth from a tiny little a population in a big world. I've had to be very crafty in how I've navigated, be honest to myself, but also the growth that I know is out there waiting for me. As much as the literary world didn't know about me, there was so much that I had to learn about it. And I want that authentic relationship everywhere I go and however I work. And so, crafty people, be smart.
What good advice. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
I cut so much. I mean, this was like 2,000 words, guys, originally, because it had like the girl's story, and then it had the Sandhill Cranes story, and then they met in the middle, and the girl is transformed. So that was like a totally different book, and I cut it in half. I mean, but then if there is one thing that my editor wanted to ditch that I kept ultimately, which is the folding of the map on this page. And if you've ever seen a child try to fold a map, right, they can't figure it out. And I thought that was the whole idea of home, and not knowing where we fit, and not knowing how to make yourself fit somewhere else. And I wanted it there, even if nobody but me got it, that was the idea. And because I had cut like basically everything else that they had asked of me, I let go of everything. Then you get to choose your battles and say, no, that one thing we're going to keep. And then they're okay with that, because, you know, if you have compromised a lot, then you get to hold on to something. But it all was for the best. You know, I was totally happy to let go of.
Right. That's a wonderfully resonant image to advocate for, because I think the map also is resonant to so many of us. I'm glad that your young character there is not accessing a digital GPS at that moment, for one example. Mélina? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add one other thing, which is that there was a point in the text where I felt strongly about how I was conveying the use of recycled materials, and went back and forth. And the editor kept asking, and I realized, of course, it pointed out that it wasn't clear, that I needed to really work on painting a clearer picture of what I was trying to say. And so in the end, it only helped me make my text better. But also, and this is something that some editors, or it depends on your publisher, but I realized and was reminded that there's back matter. So I could add more into the very back, where there's an explanation and some projects on how to actually do some of these, make some of these recycled materials. And so, again, depending on your publisher, that's always an option. And that's something that I was reminded of, and really helped move through that particular issue, because I could just, add all those words back in the back. And so it's still there, but just in a different way. So.
Right. It's still there. Well, that might be a nice note to end on, because it is there, and all the magic and all the work and all the love that you all have put into these books and into this conversation is a joy to experience. And like John, I couldn't recommend more highly that readers go ahead and check out these books. I want to thank you all again. And as we close, I want to remind our viewers that we do have other great Twin Cities Book Festival events coming up. We're going to make sure you have a link in the chat so you can check them out. Take a moment to thank our media sponsors: Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine, Minnesota Public Radio, the Star Tribune, and Twin Cities Public Television, as well as, once again, the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council and the Minnesota State Arts Board. Their funding comes from legislative appropriations from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. We are proud to earn that funding. And thanks most especially to each and every viewer who is watching today. Tell your friends. There'll be a replay up. And thank you again to these wonderful authors. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.